Mic check, mic check, mic check. Okay, we're gonna see if this works here. In the meantime, while the market is doing absolutely nothing at the moment. All right, people. We'll see if that works. We'll see if that works. Gangster, gangster, gangster. Jesus, that is right. Okay. Hold up. But I can't see any of the chat coming through Restream. Something is going on here. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. If I overlay the chat, why is YouTube not coming through Restream? Huh. Okay. All right. Nonetheless, I see you guys. Huh. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Guys, so far we haven't seen much right now for the market reaction to this pause that we all saw was a 97.9% chance of having a pause here. But this is interesting nonetheless. This is pretty interesting nonetheless. We are seeing the market kind of see the slightest little bit of rejection, but nothing noteworthy at this time. Names like Google are still peeling up. Names like Oklo are still peeling up. Amazon, not so much. Nvidia, AMD, both still peeling up. Jeez. Okay. All right. I think YouTube and Restream are having a significant technical issue, which is fine. But right now, what I am watching is Tesla. Come on down, Tessie. Come on down. Okay. Yeah, Powell's gonna be coming in at 2:30. We're gonna be chilling till then. Open looks decent for another bounce up here. Okay. Let's see here. Anything below 300 I like. Anything below 300 I like. Okay. Perfect. We are Gucci. Okay. Let's see here. SPY, how do we react? Oklo is pushing up pretty strong here. We are roughly 7 minutes away from Federal Chair Jerome Powell from speaking. and I do have a Jerome Powell stream ready to pop on when the time does make itself available. Oklo is now pushing new day highs here. This is decent. I don't mind that at all. We like this. We like this. Oh, wait. What the heck did I just do? Oops. There we go. Much better. Much better. Apple stuck. Let's pull up Apple here. I mean, you could say Apple's stuck, or you could say Apple's falling into earnings. Just seeing a little bit of drawdown, nothing crazy. All right, guys, we are 5 minutes from hearing Jerome Rome. 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 I'm watching this very closely. Mm-mm. 2 minutes and 25 seconds. The Qs are pushing to new highs here. SPY's also pushing to new highs here. All right. Here we go. Here we go. $12 seconds. Here we go.
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity has moderated. GDP rose at a 1.2% pace in the first half of this year, down from 2.5% last year. Although the increase in the second quarter was stronger at 3%, focusing on the first half of the year helps smooth through the volatility in the quarterly figures related to the unusual swings in net exports. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. In contrast, business investment in equipment and intangibles picked up from last year's pace. Activity in the housing sector remains weak. In the labor market, conditions have remained solid.
Payroll hit new all-time highs.
150,000 per month over the past 3 months. The unemployment rate at 4.1% remains low and has stayed in a narrow range over the past year. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance and consistent with maximum employment. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 2.5% over the 12 months ending in June, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.7%. These readings are little changed from the beginning of the year, although the underlying composition of price changes has shifted. Services inflation has continued to ease, while increased tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs, as reflected in both market-based and survey-based measures. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5% and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to prevent a one-time increase in the price level from becoming an ongoing inflation problem. For the time being, we're well positioned to learn more about the likely course of the economy and the evolving balance of risks before adjusting our policy stance.
I don't know if they're going to change rates at all,
We see our current
guys.
policy stance as appropriate to guard against inflation risks. We're also attentive to risks on the employment side of our mandate. In coming months, we will receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate.
Oh, okay.
At this meeting, the committee continued its discussions as part of our 5-year review of our monetary policy framework. We focused on potential revisions to our statement on longer-run goals and monetary policy strategy, and are on track to wrap up any modifications by late summer. The Fed has been assigned 2 goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
There we go. Not bad. Overall, not bad. Not horrible, not great.
Thanks,
not
Chair
bad.
Powell. There's a lot of lean in the markets, and not to mention out of the administration for a rate cut now in September. Is that expectation unrealistic at this point?
So, as you know, today we decided to leave our policy rate where it's been, where I would characterize as modestly restrictive. Inflation is running a bit above 2%, as I mentioned, even excluding tariff effects. The labor market's solid, historically low unemployment. Financial conditions are accommodative, and the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy were holding it back inappropriately. So it seems to me and to almost the whole committee that the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy is holding it back inappropriately, and modestly restrictive policy seems appropriate. All that said, there's also downside risk to the labor market. In coming months, we'll receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate.
So, just to follow up, by coming months, does that include the possibility you'll be getting essentially 2 rounds of jobs and inflation data between now and the September meeting? Is that potentially adequate to make a decision to lower rates at that point?
So you're right. We do have, this is an intermeeting period when we'll get 2 full rounds of employment and inflation data before the time of the September meeting. We have made no decisions about September. We don't do that in advance. We'll be taking that information into consideration and all the other information we get as we make our decision at the September meeting.
That was a little change of pace right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You took out the word or the notion that uncertainty has diminished from this statement. Does that mean uncertainty has increased? And I'm just wondering, the administration has struck several deals with large trading partners where it seems like we now know what the rate is going to be. Does knowing that rate add to your certainty to change policy, or do you need to wait to see the economic effects?
So essentially, the statement in our statement about uncertainty reflects what's gone on since the last meeting. So at the time of the last meeting, uncertainty had moved down a little bit, but it was more or less even this time. So we took out, had diminished because it didn't diminish further. So there's not really much in that. And then your second question is, say again?
There have been several deals that have been struck, and now we seem to have an idea what the tariff rates are going to be with some of our large trading partners. Does that not add to the kind of certainty you might need, or is it you're waiting for the economic effects to show themselves?
No, I think we're still, you're right, it's been a very dynamic time for these trade negotiations, and lots and lots of events in the intermeeting period, but we're still a ways away from seeing where things settle down. We are clearly getting more and more information, and I think at this point, people's estimates, our estimates, outside estimates of the likely, effective level of tariffs is not moving around that much at this point. But at the same time, there are many uncertainties left to resolve. So yes, we are learning more and more. It doesn't feel like we're very close to the end of that process, and that's not for us to judge. But it feels like there's much more to come, as well, looking ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Neil Jerome with Axios. This morning we got a GDP report in which final domestic private purchases decelerated, slowest pace since 22. There was a weakness in the interest-sensitive sectors and residential investment, commercial structures. Are those not signs that monetary policy is a little too restrictive right now, given current economic conditions?
So the GDP and PDFP numbers came in pretty much right where we expected them to come in. You got to look at the whole picture. So certainly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, economic activity data, GDP, private domestic final purchases, which we think is a narrower but better signal for future, for where the economy is going, has come down to a little better than 1%, 1.2%, I think, in the case of GDP for the first half, whereas it was 2.5% last year. So that has certainly come down. But if you look at the labor market, what you see is, by many, many statistics, the labor market is kind of still in balance. It's things like quits, job openings, and let alone the unemployment rate. They're all by many measures, very similar to where they were a year ago. So you do not see weakening in the labor market. You do see a slowing in job creation, but also a slowing in the supply of workers. So you've got a labor market that's in balance, albeit partially because both demand and supply for workers is coming down at the same pace, and that's why the unemployment rate has remained roughly stable, which is why I said we do see downside risk in the labor market. I mean, our two mandate variables, right, are inflation and maximum employment, stable prices and maximum employment, not so much growth. So the labor market looks solid. Inflation is above target, and even if you look through the tariff effects, we think it's still a bit above target, and that's why our stance is where it is. But as I mentioned, downside risks to the labor market are certainly apparent.
So on labor, given the fluid labor supply situation, is there a number for this jobs report we get on Friday that would look to you like equilibrium job growth?
The main number you have to look at now is the unemployment rate, because it's true that the demand for workers in the form of, let's call it, just say payroll jobs, that number has come down, but so has the break-even number, kind of in tandem. So, as long as that puts the labor market in balance, the fact that it's getting into balance due to declines in both supply and demand, though, I think it is suggestive of downside risk. So we of course, will be watching that carefully.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the New York Times. Two of your colleagues called for a quarter-point cut today, and I'm wondering what aspects of their argument were most compelling to you and how you're weighing their views against those on the committee who, as of the June forecast, were in the camp of the Fed holding interest rates steady for the remainder of the year. And just in terms of the June SEP in particular, is that still the best representation of where the core of the committee is?
So on the dissents, what you want from everybody and also from a dissenter is a clear explanation of what your thinking is and what are the arguments you're making, and we had that today. So I think basically this was quite a good meeting all around the table where people were thought carefully about this and put their positions out there. As I mentioned, the sort of the majority of the committee was of the view that inflation's a bit above target, maximum employment is at target. That calls for modestly restrictive, in my way of thinking, modestly restrictive stance of policy for now. But we had two dissenters who I think, you want that clear thinking and expression of your thinking, and we certainly had that today, I think all around the table. In terms of, you asked about the June SEP, I wouldn't, that you're right, that's what it says, and that may well, I couldn't point to it 6 weeks later as expressing people's thought. You really can't do that. We don't run an SEP, and I don't like to substitute in my own estimate of what the SEP might be. We don't have one. So I'll just say that, we haven't made any decisions about September. We'll be monitoring all the incoming data and asking ourselves whether the federal funds rate is in the right place.
And just on the point about policy being only modestly restrictive, does that mean that there's actually not much scope to reduce rates once the conditions for a cut are met, barring a significant weakening of the labor market? So
let me say, my own estimate is modestly restrictive, and there are a range of views of what the neutral rate is at this moment for our economy, and so others may say it's more restrictive or less restrictive even. We're going to be, at some point, when we return to moving toward a more neutral stance, we'll be making that judgment as we go. I don't think we have a preset course. It's not so mechanical as saying, we've derived with great confidence the neutral rate and that is our destination, because really we understand that no one actually knows what the neutral rate is. We know it by its works, and that will be how the way the economy reacts over time to, slightly looser policy.
Nick Timmeros, The Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, my question is about what have you learned over the last few months about the inflation generating and price pass-through process? And just to drill down, the June CPI report showed evidence of tariff-induced goods inflation. Now, the tariff landscape is only starting to be settled with some of these more recent deals. Given the lags between when tariffs are announced and when they show up in goods prices, is 2 months a long enough horizon to evaluate the impact and be confident that tariffs aren't impacting the broader inflation process?
I think you have to think of this as still quite early days. And so I think what we're seeing now is substantial amounts of tariff revenue being collected on the order of $30 billion a month, which is substantially higher than before. And the evidence seems to be mostly not paid only to a small extent through exporters lowering their price, and companies or retailers, sort of people who are upstream, institutions that are upstream from the consumer, are paying most of this for now. It's starting to show up in consumer prices, as you know, in the June report. We expect to see more of that. And we know from surveys that companies feel that they have every intention of putting this through to the consumer, but the truth is they may not be able to in many cases. So I think we're just going to have to watch and learn empirically how much of this and over what period of time. I think we've learned that the process will probably be slower than expected at the beginning, but we never expected it to be fast. We think we have a long way to go to really understand exactly how it will be. So that's how we're thinking of it right now.
So if I could follow up, is the reticence to look through core goods inflation being driven by the judgment that during the pandemic expectations proved more adaptive than anyone at the Fed expected? Is it being driven by uncertainty over how restrictive policy is?
You could argue we are a bit looking through goods inflation by not raising rates. We haven't reacted to new inflation, but I mean I wouldn't insist upon that. But I don't think I think the base case, as I said, a reasonable base case is that these are one-time price effects. Of course, in the end, there will not be. This will not turn out to be inflation, because we'll make sure that it's not. We will, through our tools, make sure that this does not move from being a one-time price increase to serious inflation. We want to do that efficiently, and that means we want to do it. If you move too soon, you wind up maybe not getting inflation all the way fixed and you have to come back, that's inefficient. If you move too late, you might do unnecessary damage to the labor market. So there won't be, in the end, a big inflationary problem. What we're trying to do is accomplish that in a way that is efficient. But in the end, there should be no doubt that we will do what we need to do to keep inflation under control. Ideally, we do it efficiently.
Tesla is coming
Bloomberg
on
Television
down.
Radio. The one big bill, leaving aside the adjectives, do you expect it to add stimulus to the economy in 2026? And would that be an argument for remaining on hold or cutting back on the number of rate cuts you would expect for next year?
So, of course, let me just ritual disclaimer that we don't express any judgments or anything like that on fiscal legislation or other legislation for that matter. But I would say when you think that, the biggest part of the bill was making permanent existing law on taxes, I don't think we see it as particularly stimulative. There should be some stimulative effect, but it shouldn't be significant over the next couple of years.
And to follow up, I don't want to put this in terms of you and the president, so let me ask it this way. Do you have concerns about the cost to the government of keeping rates elevated for longer in terms of interest rate charges?
Yeah, no, that's, we have a mandate, and that's maximum employment and price stability. And it is, it's not something we do to consider the cost to the government of our rate changes. We have to be able to look at the goal variables Congress has given us, use the tools they've given us to achieve those goals, and that's what we do. We don't consider the fiscal needs of the federal government. No advanced economy central bank does that, and it wouldn't be good if we did do that, it would be good neither for our credibility nor for the credibility of U.S. fiscal policy. So it's just not something we take into consideration.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. When it comes to the renovations of the Federal Reserve's headquarters that the administration has been looking into, do you see their interest in that issue as being directly tied to the president's push to get you to lower interest rates?
Here we go.
Not for me to say. I will say we had a nice visit with the president. It was an honor to host him. It's not something that happens very often at the Federal Reserve to have the president come over, let alone to visit a building. But it was a good visit.
Are there any aspects of the project that they've raised that you see as making you reconsider any aspects of the project?
So, this project was hatched and conceived almost a decade ago now, and we went through the very long process of clearing it through historic preservation at the National Capital Planning Commission, and a lot of back and forth there. It was very constructive. We started out to do the work, and we're very well along on that work, and I was quite pleased to have the president say multiple times that what he really wanted to see was us getting this construction completed as soon as possible. That is our focus, and that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
And it
Andrew
all
Ackerman with the
comes
Washington Post.
down.
What message do you take from the fact that inflation hit 2.1% last September and has bounced higher since? Why do you think financial conditions are restrictive and a neutral rate's below 4% when inflation has stopped falling for almost a year?
So inflation, when you talk about these 12-month inflation measures, you're always battling residual seasonality. So we'll have, for example, 2 months of high inflation sometimes early in the year, and then inflation turns lower, and a lot of that may just be an artifact. So that's why we look at the 12-month numbers. I think inflation is most of the way back to 2%. There are things like the catch-up inflation. So, for example, all the insurance costs that they're only now going through inflation, but they actually reflect inflationary pressures from 2-3 years ago. So that's got to go through. In addition, now we have 3 or 4 tenths of inflation in core inflation from tariffs. So, and we can't really separate that out. We're not going to have a separate kind of inflation that isn't the tariffs. We're always going to be dealing with all of inflation. But the composition, as I mentioned, has really changed. And if you go back to the last couple of years, it was all about services inflation, which was being very sticky. Now services inflation is coming down nicely. Goods inflation was well behaved before, and now goods inflation is going up. So the story has really changed. That's partially because of tariffs. It's also partially because we had restrictive policy in place, and we've seen that the result of that gradually work its way through the services economy.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask is, are you comfortable that BLS can continue performing their mission effectively if they take an 8% reduction in headcount and authorized spending as the administration has proposed?
I'm not going to comment on the administration's proposal. I do think, as I've said, I think that we're getting the data that we need to do our jobs, and I think it's really important that good data helps not just the Fed, it helps the government, but it also helps the private sector. People in the economy, they use this data a lot too, so it's quite important for our economy and certainly for the Fed's work and other government agencies' work that we continue to get better at data. That's what we've been doing for 100
This
years.
market is pulling on
It's
back,
very hard
gang.
to
Oh
accurately
my
capture in real time
days.
the
I
output
hope.
of a $20+
I
trillion
hope.
economy. And the United States has been a leader in that for 100 years, and we really need to continue that, in my view.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. How concerned are you with the data that we're coming in, showing no significant upward trend in inflation over the past 6 months, that the wait-and-see approach for inflation is actually giving companies cover to raise prices?
How concerned am I that say that again?
The wait-and-see approach is
The
giving...
wait-and-see approach, what do you mean by that?
For cutting rates. You're waiting to see if the tariffs will affect inflation. So it's a wait-and-see approach.
Well, so that, where policy's restrictive. When we start cutting, it'll go toward neutral.
Okay. This delay, though, where you're saying there's a one-time price increase for tariffs, which possibly could lead into bigger inflation or more inflation. Is that giving companies cover, though, to raise prices?
Well, what may be giving, it's not our policy stance, what may be giving, some companies will certainly be taking advantage of the fact of the tariffs and all the discussion of how they're going to, companies will raise prices when and as they can.
Here we go,
So you saw
people.
it famously in the first administration of President Trump.
Here
during
we
those
go.
tariffs, washing machines were tariffed, but dryers weren't. But what do you know? The price of dryers went up too, just like washing machines. So companies will often just they'll cross the street in a group, if you know what I mean. That'll happen. We don't see a lot of that. I mean, what we see now is basically the very beginnings of whatever the effects turn out to be on goods inflation. And I'll say again, they may be less than people estimate or more than people estimate. They're not going to be zero. Consumers will pay some of this. Businesses will pay some of this. Retailers will pay some of this. But we're just going to have to see it through.
And just to follow, if I could, some additional tariffs have been in place since February, and things really haven't broken yet with the economy. So how do you justify to somebody who's looking for a house, who's facing a 7% mortgage and maybe can't afford those rates? How do you justify that?
Well, so the housing is a
Almost
special
100%.
case, right? We don't set mortgage rates at the Fed, right? We set an overnight rate, and the rates that go into mortgages are longer term rates, like Treasury rates. It might be 30-year rates, it might be shorter than that, but it's not the overnight Fed's rate. It's not that we don't have any effect. We do have an effect, but we're not the main effect. There are other things going on in the housing sector, and one of those is just there's kind of a long-term housing shortage that we have. We haven't built enough housing. This is not something the Fed can help with, and that'll be the case even after things normalize. So I think the best thing that we can do for housing is to have 2%
It's
inflation
plummeting.
and maximum employment, and that's what we can contribute to housing. There are lots of other jobs to do for the private sector and Congress, but that's what we're trying to get to. We've made a lot of progress toward that. We have a very good labor market right now. Inflation, we were very close to 2%. We're seeing some goods inflation move us away, but so far not very far away.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you. Well, can you give us a little more about what kind of economic data does the Fed need to see before you'll be ready to cut? I mean, do you need inflation back nearly to target? Are there other things in the pricing that you look for? Do you need to see weakening in the job market? What kind of things are you looking for?
I mean, ultimately, it could be any of those things, right? But you know, if you saw that the risks to the two goals were moving into balance, if they were fully in balance, that would imply that you should move toward a more neutral stance of policy. This is the special situation we're in, which is we have two-sided risk to both of our goals. When we paused, inflation was above target and the labor market was pretty good. So you know, that was a time when policy was restrictive when we paused. And to be restrictive is to be supporting a return to our inflation target.
Come on now.
So as the two targets get back into balance, you would think you'd move in a way closer to neutral, and that the next steps that we take are likely to be in that direction. What will it take? You know, it'll be the totality of the evidence. As I mentioned, there's quite a lot of data coming in, which before the next meeting. Will it be dispositive of that? You know, it's really hard to say. We don't make those decisions right now, so we'll have to see.
Well, I guess just in terms of inflation, though, for example, like some people would point to if it remains only in goods and it doesn't bleed over to services, then maybe that's evidence that the tariff effect is going to be a temporary one-time thing. Is that kind of thing affect your thinking, or do you just need to see the number come down
I think
closer to 2?
We'll look at everything. You know, it's, as I mentioned, you know, a pretty reasonable base case is that this will be a one-time price increase. And in the end, we'll make sure that that's the case. We're just trying to do that
100%.
efficiently.
Oh my God.
And efficiently means getting the timing right so we don't again, if we cut rates too soon, maybe we didn't finish the job with inflation. History is dotted with examples of that. If you cut too late, then maybe you're doing unnecessary damage to the labor market. So we're trying to get that timing right, and that's effectively what we're doing.
Claire Jones, Financial Times.
Clean.
Just a question on the dollar. We've seen it decline quite heavily this year. I was wondering if there's been any discussion about that at the meetings and to what degree that may be complicating your attempts to get inflation back to target. Thank you.
So this goes back to the division of labor between the Fed and the Treasury, as you I'm sure know, and you know the Treasury only speaks to the dollar. It's not something that's been a topic of you know, major discussion at all at the Fed. I wouldn't say it doesn't come up. If the transcripts, when they come out in a few years, they'll probably reflect some mentions of the dollar, but it would never be a major focus.
And just to follow on, if I may, to Andrew's question, I think the amount of imputed data in CPI now is up to 35%. I mean, is there any discussion of that as well? Is there any consideration of looking at alternative measures, data scraping and so on, in order to just ensure you've got a good read on what's happening to prices in the U.S. economy? Thank you.
You know, we're monitoring the situation. We do, of course, I mean, as you know, during the pandemic, we looked at a whole lot of new kinds of data. People are looking at big data sets that you can get from all sorts of places, and we do all of that. But we really need, the government data really is the gold standard in data, and we need it to be, you know, to be good and be able to rely on it. And we're not going to be able to substitute for that, but you know, we have to make do with what we have. But I certainly hope that we get what we need.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Jay O'Brien, ABC News. President Trump has obviously invoked your name a lot. He has personally pressured you. Are you concerned the way that conduct might impact the Fed's independence going forward?
I'll just say that, I think that having an independent central bank has been an institutional arrangement that has served the public well. And as long as it serves the public well, it should continue and be respected. If it didn't serve the public well, then it wouldn't be something that we should just automatically defend. But what it gives us, and other central banks, what it gives you is the ability to make these very challenging decisions that in ways that are focused on the data and the evolving outlook, the balance of risks, and all the things we talk about, and not political factors. And so governments all over the advanced economy world have chosen to put a little bit of distance between direct political control of those decisions and the decision makers. So if you were not to have that, there would be a great temptation, of course, to use interest rates to affect elections, for example. And that's something that we don't want to do. So I think that's pretty widely understood. Certainly it is in Congress. And I think it's very important. I'll just say that.
Maria Eloisa.
Afternoon, Sir Powell. Maria Luisa Capurro from Bloomberg News. You mentioned a slowdown in consumer spending, and I wanted to see if you could walk us through what was the discussion with the committee around that. We've seen delinquency rates rising for upper income households. How do you see that evolving in the next few months, and how much of a vulnerability that is for the economy going forward?
Dang.
Consumer spending had been very, very strong for the last couple of years, and had repeatedly, forecasters, not just us, had been forecasting it would slow down, and now maybe it finally has. So I would say, if you talk to credit card companies, for example, they will tell you that the consumer's in solid shape and that spending is at a healthy level. It's not growing rapidly, but it's at a healthy level, and delinquencies are not a problem. You mentioned high-end delinquencies. I don't know what to make of that. I read the same thing. But so generally, if you look at the banks, and when the banks talk about in their earnings calls, the performance of credit has been good. So essentially, you have a consumer that's in good shape and is spending, not at a rapid rate, but it's true, and it was, again, right in line with what we expected, the GDP data that we got this week. And I think it's still a little bit difficult to interpret because you have these massive swings in net exports, which may also be affecting, some of that can be can affect consumer spending as well. Look, it's one of the data points that we pay most careful attention to, and there's no question that it's slowed, and we're watching it closely. But we also watch the labor market and the performance of inflation. Those are our two variables that we're assigned to maximize.
And just to follow up on what my colleagues were asking about this sense, Governor Waller said that the labor market is on edge, and he was pointing to weaknesses on the private sector. I was wondering, you've said that the main number to look at is the unemployment number overall, but what was the discussion about the state of the private jobs market?
So I'm not going to talk about any individual's, any individual's comments. I wouldn't do that. But I think what we know is that private sector job creation, certainly in the last report, we'll see on Friday, but had come down a bit. And if you take the QCEW adjustment seriously, it may be even lower, maybe close to zero. But the unemployment rate was still low. So what that's telling you is that demand for workers is slowing, but so is the supply. So it's in balance, oddly enough. You've got a very low unemployment rate, and it's kind of been there for a year as job creation has moved down. But also we know that, because of immigration policy, really, the flow into our labor forces is just a great deal slower. And those two things have slowed more or less in tandem. If you look at things like I mentioned, quits, look at wages. Wages are gradually cooling. Look at vacancies to unemployment. Those things have been pretty stable they haven't really moved a lot in a full year. So I think if you take the totality of the labor market data, you've got a solid labor market. But I think you have to see that there are downside risks. You don't see weakening in the labor market, but I think you've got downside risks in a world where unemployment's being held down because both demand and supply are declining. I think it's worth paying close attention to it, and we are.
Nancy.
Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. One more question on the lack of unanimity in today's decision, the two dissents. Was there talk during the meeting? I know you're not going to talk about what individuals said, but in general, was there talk during the meeting of cutting rates, and what was the case against that at the meeting?
Sure. So, we have an economic go-around where people talk about the economy, and then that's yesterday, and then today we have a monetary policy go-around. All the way around the table, everyone gives their views. So the discussion around policy was, the majority view was still what it has been, which is that inflation's running above target, maximum employment is right at target. That means policy should be a little bit restrictive, somewhat restrictive, because we want inflation to move all the way back to its target. So that's where people have been and still are. Two of our members felt that the time had come to cut, and that they, for the reasons that they're going to express. I won't tell you the reasons. They'll issue some kind of a thing in the next day or so. So, but that's the story, and I would say, well argued, very thoughtfully argued all around the table, good arguments, and it's a situation where, an unusual situation. The economy is in good shape, but it's an unusual situation where you have risks to both your employment mandate and your inflation mandate. That's the nature of a supply shock, and it's probably not surprising that there would be differences and different perspectives on that, as well as different views of where the neutral rate is, so that different views of how tight policy is. So we have those. I will say what you hope is that people, explain their positions very thoughtfully and clearly, and we absolutely had that today, all the way around the table. I would call it one of the better meetings I can recall from that standpoint.
And you've said you're waiting to be confident inflation is heading toward your 2% target before you start cutting rates. When you do get that confidence, would you be in favor of lowering rates right away?
It's not quite the way I would put it. I said that's why we think policy should be restrictive, is because inflation is above target. When we have risks to both goals, one of them is farther away from goal than the other, and that's inflation. Maximum employment's at goal, so that means policy should be tight, because tight policy is what brings inflation down. If you came to the view that the risks to the two were more in balance, that would imply that policy shouldn't be restrictive. It should be more neutral, more a neutral stance, and that would be somewhat lower than where we are now. No one knows exactly where that is. So that's the framework I think I'd be taking, and we'll just have to see. We're going to be obviously looking at a lot of data in the next cycle. It is one of the cycles where we have 2 employment and 2 inflation reports, and we'll see where that takes us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking the question. Jeff Cox from CNBC.com. A metric that you like to cite a lot is the final sales to private domestic purchasers. That was down to a 1.2% gain in second quarter from 1.9% in Q1, suggesting that there's some softening in underlying demand. I just wonder if you look at that, you combine that with some of the housing numbers, the weakness that you acknowledged at the top of your remarks, that the housing market is in fact weak. And the inflation numbers from GDP today came down to 2.1% for headline, 2.5% for core. I'm wondering how much more movement you would need to see from these data points before you would be comfortable with cutting in, say, September.
It's going to be the total. Hard to answer that specifically. PDFP, I think, for the first half, private domestic final purchases, or final sales, as people call it, was 1.6 on the first half. GDP, I believe, was 1.2%. That's the whole half. You mentioned the quarters. So those are slower, but GDP is bumpy quarter to quarter, half to half, and often gets revised after the fact. The labor market data we still think is continue to think is the best data we have on the economy, and that shows a 4.1% unemployment rate. It shows wages still at a healthy level, but moving ever closer to what we would regard as long-run sustainable, consistent with longer-run productivity and 2% inflation. So the labor market is actually still quite solid. Inflation is above target, even ignoring tariffs. It's a little bit above target, and tariffs. So we're watching all of that, and again, trying to do the right thing in what is a challenging situation because you're being pulled in two directions, and you have to decide which of those to go in. And actually, at some point, if they're sort of equally at risk, then you really want to be at a neutral policy stance, which we're not right now.
So it'd be safe to say that if the data kind of stays in line with where it is right now, that you wouldn't be comfortable with cutting in September?
I'm not going to say that. No, I just think we're going to need to see the data, and it can go in many different directions. The inflation data and the employment data, and we're going to make a judgment based on all of the data and based on that balance of risks analysis that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Greg, Rob, for the last question.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch. The Treasury Secretary has said recently that it would be confusing for the markets if you stayed on as a governor after your term as chair ends. And I was wondering if you had any update for us on a decision on that front.
Sorry, I do not have any update for you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, guys, that bounce got bought right back up there. This is an absolutely insane bounce from the market here, but as you guys can see, we are seeing quite the move here. Check us out. SPY came back down towards 331, ripped right back up towards 333. Pretty significant bounce here for the market. Now, for those of you guys who are watching Tesla, it did end up coming back down towards weekly lows. I am pretty sure if you watch the video that I put out last night, I had a pretty clear-cut game plan for Tesla. And it did exactly. I drew a freaking circle for where I thought it would come back down to, guys. And I cannot tell you enough, it did exactly that. 2AT. Congrats to all those who took that trade. Congrats to all those who went short. Too funny. Okay. Wait, why can you guys no longer see my screen? That's odd. All right. Now, hopefully it's back. That was really weird. So this is going to be very important for Tesla. Can we hold this level of support here, or does it capitulate back down towards this 301 level? That's going to be the next step. That is going to be the next step. Second, guys. Okay, as long as Tesla stays below 317, this is gonna be a little tough. It's gonna be a little tough here. Let me just take a little peek around to see what else is looking shaky right now. Amazon is looking a little shaky right now. AMD and Nvidia did hold up pretty good. I will say they did hold up pretty good. Apple came back down. Microsoft has earnings after close. It looks decently bullish here, to tell you the truth. Chinese names are down a little bit. Overall, guys, nothing much has changed. So the important thing now is really to watch until the earnings coming in tomorrow. Coming in tonight into tomorrow. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, I will catch you guys in a bit. I hope you guys have yourselves an absolutely amazing afternoon. Twitch, I got more points for you. Mod Squad, we appreciate you guys as always. Thanks for the horrible start to the stream, to be honest. Without YouTube, actually, I still can't see YouTube through Restream. I'm going back and forth between tabs here just to read the chat, which is a bit much. But Restream, hopefully you guys can get it together before tomorrow. All right, guys. Much love. Enjoy. Deuces.